The sun had barely dipped below the horizon when Eric Johnson, a retired teacher, set up his fishing chair by the small pond nestled behind his home in Willow Creek Estates. The neighborhood was governed by an HOA notorious for rules that often seemed more about control than community. Eric knew this all too well, but after years of keeping his head down, he thought sitting by the pond for a quiet evening wouldn't stir trouble. That was until two security guards in black polo shirts, stenciled with the HOA emblem, appeared from the walking trail, their flashlights already shining, though it wasn't even dark yet. "Sir, this is private property. You can't be here," one of them barked. Eric, ever calm, reminded them that his property deed included access to the pond. The guards weren't interested in reason. They scribbled notes on a pad, snapped pictures of his chair and tackle box, and muttered about violations. Eric had been fined before for ridiculous reasons: grass an inch too tall, holiday lights taken down a day too late, his daughter parking on the street instead of the driveway. But this was different. The aggression in their eyes unsettled him. He knew they were itching for confrontation. He decided not to argue further, packed up his chair, and went inside. Later that evening, over dinner, he told his daughter Maya about the incident. Maya wasn't just his daughter. She was an FBI tactical commander, a fact few in the neighborhood knew. She listened carefully, her brow furrowed with concern. She had seen too many situations where authority, misused or unchecked, spiraled into danger. "Dad, if they're escalating like this, it won't stop here," Maya warned. But Eric waved it off, saying he didn't want her to worry about something as petty as HOA guards with too much time on their hands. Maya wasn't convinced. That night, as she polished her badge and holstered her service weapon before bed, she made a mental note. If those men came near her father again, they'd learn very quickly that not everyone in Willow Creek was a pushover. The following weekend should have been quiet, but Eric noticed the difference immediately when he drove back from a grocery store. The HOA security gate, normally a simple stop for residents, had suddenly transformed into a miniature fortress. Two guards, the same ones from the pond, were standing stiffly in front of his car with crossed arms, while another sat in the booth scribbling notes. "Step out of the vehicle, sir," one ordered, as though this were a military checkpoint. Eric froze, gripping the steering wheel tighter. "For what? I live here. You know me," he said, trying to keep his voice calm. The guard sneered, replying that Eric had been flagged for multiple violations and his access privileges were under review. "Access? To my own home?" Eric asked, stunned. They weren't interested in his protest. When he reached for his phone to call his daughter, one of them leaned closer, resting his hand on a holstered pistol strapped at his waist. Eric's breath caught. These weren't sworn officers, just HOA hired guards, but they were armed and clearly itching to use intimidation as their weapon of choice. Eric carefully reversed his car, pulled it over, and called Maya. Within 15 minutes, a black SUV pulled up behind the gate and Maya stepped out, tall and sharp-eyed, her tactical training evident in the way she moved. The guard stiffened but did not step aside. "This your daughter?" One sneered. Maya's gaze cut through them like steel. "Yes, and you're about to regret what you've done tonight." She calmly walked forward, her voice low but commanding. "You have no legal authority to detain or harass my father. If you think you do, then explain it to me right now on camera." She held up her phone, recording. One guard bristled, mumbling about HOA rules and private enforcement. The other shifted, uneasily, hand still hovering near his gun. Eric could feel the tension humming like electricity in the air. Maya didn't flinch. "Let me be crystal clear," she said, taking one step closer. "You are impersonating law enforcement by detaining residents and threatening them with firearms. That's a federal crime. You want to play officer, fine. But tonight, you've chosen the wrong family." Her voice was sharp enough to slice through the night. The guards exchanged glances, suddenly less confident. But their pride wouldn't let them back down. "Lady, you don't scare us," one finally muttered. Maya smiled thinly, reaching into her jacket. "I wasn't trying to." With one swift motion, she pulled out her FBI badge, the metallic emblem gleaming under the harsh gate lights. "This does." Eric watched as both men's faces drained of color. Their hands instantly dropped away from their weapons as if burned. The SUV behind her was still idling, and Eric knew it wasn't just his daughter. She had backup, waiting if things went further. For the first time since the HOA harassment began, Eric allowed himself to breathe easier. The game had changed, and Willow Creek's self-appointed enforcers had no idea who they had just picked a fight with. The next day, the Willow Creek HOA board gathered in their pristine clubhouse, a place dripping with false elegance, marble floors, chandelier, and polished wood that tried to mask the rot beneath. Eric sat quietly near the back, invited only because Maya insisted on accompanying him. The board president, a smug man named Richard Harlan with slick-back gray hair and a perpetual smirk, opened the meeting by declaring serious violations of community order. He pointed at Eric as though he were a criminal defendant, listing fabricated infractions: failure to follow HOA landscaping rules, disturbance of peace, unauthorized guests. Every word was met with nods from his cronies, seated at the long oak table. Eric clenched his fists under the desk, his voice caught between anger and disbelief, but Maya leaned forward, whispering, "Don't bite. Let them talk." Richard then pulled out his trump card, grainy security footage of Eric at the gate, edited to look as if he were resisting and causing a disturbance. Gasps rippled through the room. "We cannot tolerate such behavior," Richard declared, his voice dripping with condescension. "Our community thrives on order, and those who refuse to abide by the rules risk removal." That's when Maya stood. She didn't ask for permission, she didn't need it. Funny thing about edited footage, she said, her voice carrying across the hall, sharp and precise. "It never tells the whole story. But lucky for us, I have the unedited version right here." She held up her phone, pressing play, and the room fell silent as the truth played on the big screen. Guards threatening her father, one with his hand on his weapon, another blocking his car. Audible gasps replaced the earlier murmurs. "This," Maya said, "is harassment, intimidation, and unlawful use of force. These men aren't peacekeepers, they're thugs hiding behind HOA lanyards." Richard sputtered, trying to regain control, but Maya wasn't finished. She walked forward, placing her FBI badge on the table with a deliberate thud that echoed through the room. "I am Commander Maya Reynolds, FBI Tactical Division. Last night, your security attempted to unlawfully detain my father at gunpoint. That is a federal matter. So before any of you decide to double down on the circus, understand this. You are one bad decision away from facing federal charges." The board fell into stunned silence, a few members shifting uncomfortably in their seats, suddenly less loyal to Richard's smug confidence. He tried to laugh it off, claiming she was bluffing, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. We'll review the evidence," he stammered. Maya leaned in, her voice dropping to a razor's edge. "Do more than review. Replace your security, remove these fabricated violations, and issue a written apology to my father. Or I'll ensure this community's name makes the evening news, and not in the way you'd like." Eric, for the first time in months, saw the fear flicker across Richard's face. The power the HOA had lorded over him was crumbling under the weight of his daughter's authority. And though the board tried to adjourn quickly, their carefully built facade of control had already cracked. The room knew it, Eric knew it, and most importantly, Richard knew it too. The boardroom may have fallen silent under Maya's authority, but silence didn't mean surrender. By the following week, whispers turned into plans, and Richard Harlan was already plotting behind closed doors. He could feel his control slipping, neighbors questioning his leadership, some even calling for a vote to strip him of presidency. His smug smile hardened into a sneer as he gathered his most loyal board members in a late-night meeting inside his office, lights dimmed, blinds drawn. "That woman thinks she can walk in here, wave her badge, and humiliate us?" He spat, slamming a stack of papers on his desk. "She's not just some neighbor's daughter, she's a threat. If we let her and her father win, the rest of these sheep will follow." One of the guards who had pulled the gun on Eric sat nervously in the corner, his job suddenly on the line. Richard pointed at him, his voice sharp. "You and your buddy, you stay quiet." Not one word about that night, or you'll both be facing charges yourselves. But I'll take care of her. Everyone has a weakness." He leaned back, his mind already working through schemes, digging into Eric's history, twisting old parking fines into criminal behavior, forging HOA violations, even spreading rumors about Maya abusing her badge for personal gain. By the weekend, letters began arriving at Eric's mailbox, notices of unpaid dues that didn't exist, threats of liens on his property, and warnings about pending legal action. The neighbors, once friendly, now avoided eye contact, whispers following Eric down the street as if he were a criminal. It was Richard's poison at work. Maya noticed immediately the deliberate harassment, the strategic character assassination, and it only fueled her resolve. Late one night, while visiting her father, she caught sight of a man parked across the street, lights off, engine running. The silhouette of one of Richard's guards was unmistakable. "They're watching you," she muttered, jaw tightening, "trying to scare us into leaving." Eric, tired and worn from years of this abuse, shook his head. "Maybe it's easier if I do leave, Maya. I don't want you caught up in this." But she turned to him, her eyes burning with the same fire she carried in the boardroom. "No, that's exactly what they want. You've lived here honestly, paid every bill, followed every rule. This is your home, and I won't let some overgrown bullies drive you out." Still, even as she said it, she knew Richard wouldn't stop until he felt untouchable again. He wasn't just protecting his power, he was protecting the empire of control he had built over the community. The moment she embarrassed him, she became his enemy, and enemies in Richard's world weren't just silenced, they were destroyed. As Maya stared out the window at the idling car, she realized this was no longer just about HOA politics. It was about intimidation, corruption, and the abuse of power at its most dangerous level. Richard had declared war, and now, for the first time in years, Maya wasn't just an FBI commander protecting the country, she was a daughter defending her father's dignity, and she was prepared to burn Richard's empire to the ground to do it. The harassment only grew worse. Phony violation letters slipped under Eric's door, his trash can mysteriously overturned every morning, even nails scattered across his driveway to puncture his tires. Richard was turning the entire neighborhood into a weapon, and the once friendly smiles of neighbors were now replaced with suspicious glares. Maya, however, had dealt with far worse than small-town bullies. She quietly opened an investigation, not as an angry daughter, but as an FBI tactical commander with access to resources Richard couldn't even imagine. Every fake notice, every forged fine, every late-night stalking attempt went into a growing dossier. She installed hidden cameras around Eric's house, tracing the guards who loitered outside at night. She dug through the HOA's finances with surgical precision, uncovering suspicious transfers to shell accounts and payments to contractors who didn't exist. One evening, as Eric sat defeated at the kitchen table, Maya laid the growing file in front of him. "Dad, they've been laundering HOA money for years. That's why Richard fights so hard to keep control. He's not just running a neighborhood association, he's running a criminal racket." Eric's eyes widened as the reality set in. "You're saying this isn't about me?" She shook her head. "It never was. You were just an easy target to remind everyone who's in charge. But he slipped when he came after you." Determined, Maya filed her preliminary findings into an internal FBI system, flagging it as a potential corruption case. By the next morning, a quiet task force was assembled, watching the HOA's every move. Richard thought he was untouchable, but every threatening letter, every misused dollar, and every guard he deployed was now evidence stacked against him. The trap was being set, and Maya knew it was only a matter of time before Richard's empire collapsed under the very rules he pretended to enforce. The morning after the pond confrontation, Eric tried to push the incident out of his mind, but the tension in Willow Creek Estates was palpable. The HOA guards he had encountered were unusually persistent, and there was an unsettling gleam in their eyes, as though the previous encounter had only fueled their aggression. As Eric drove to his daily errands, he noticed a black SUV idling near the entrance, partially obscured by a hedge, the engine silently humming. Something about it didn't sit right. When he returned home later that evening, the same two guards who had confronted him at the pond suddenly appeared again, this time blocking his driveway. "Step out of the vehicle," one demanded, his hand hovering near a holstered firearm. Eric froze, the familiar feeling of dread creeping up his spine. "For what?" he asked calmly, though his heart pounded. "You're trespassing on HOA property," the guard spat, pointing toward the pond. Eric knew arguing would do no good. These were men empowered by intimidation, not law. He fumbled for his phone and called his daughter, Maya, knowing she would know exactly what to do. Within minutes, a sleek black SUV rolled into view, and Maya emerged exuding authority and precision. Her uniform was civilian, but her posture and presence screamed tactical expertise honed over years in the FBI. She didn't shout or threaten. She simply walked up, her hand resting near her sidearm, her eyes locked on the guards. "This is your warning," she said, voice low and commanding, yet every syllable carried the weight of federal authority. The guards hesitated, glancing at each other nervously. "You have no right to threaten or detain a resident. I am FBI Tactical Commander Maya Reynolds, and I suggest you step away before someone gets hurt." Her calm, unwavering tone made the first guard's hand twitch away from the gun. For a long moment, neither side moved. Eric's pulse raced, but he knew Maya had full control. Slowly, the guards backed off, muttering something about following orders and retreating toward the gate. Maya turned to her father, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. "They thought this was intimidation," she said quietly, "but they forgot who they were dealing with. And if they try this again, we won't just talk." Eric exhaled, relief flooding him, yet he knew the peace would be short-lived. The HOA wasn't just petty, they were relentless. And Maya, fully aware of the stakes, began quietly planning the next steps that would ensure her father's safety and expose the corruption hidden behind the pristine fences of Willow Creek Estates. The game had changed, and from this point on, the HOA had no idea how unstoppable they were about to discover Maya could be. By the time the dust settled, the HOA board's reign of intimidation had completely crumbled. Federal investigators had audited every record, uncovered forged documents, and documented harassment and illegal actions by security personnel. Richard Harlan and his inner circle were handcuffed and led away, their smug arrogance replaced by panic and disbelief. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains and fences, finally seeing the full extent of the corruption that had been hidden behind perfectly trimmed hedges. Maya stood tall beside her father, the badge on her chest catching the afternoon sun, a symbol of authority and justice that none of the HOA members could ignore. Eric hugged his daughter tightly, gratitude and relief coursing through him, while Maya quietly assured him, "No one will ever intimidate us again." The remaining HOA staff, shaken and terrified, were forced to resign, and the neighborhood had no choice but to elect a new, transparent board under strict federal oversight. Letters of apology and restitution were delivered to Eric, acknowledging not just the harassment he endured, but also the potential danger his daughter faced when the guards had pulled a gun on him and her. For Maya, it was more than a personal victory. It was a message that abuse of power, no matter how small or hidden behind HOA rules, would never go unchallenged. Residents who had previously supported the board in silence now came forward to support the Johnson family, offering apologies and assistance in rebuilding trust within the community. Eric finally felt at peace in his own home, knowing that the neighborhood he had lived in for decades had been purged of corruption and intimidation. Maya, ever vigilant, continued to mentor and train her team, but she also allowed herself a rare moment of quiet pride, knowing that she had protected her family and restored justice where it was long overdue. The HOA's attempt to instill fear had backfired completely, replaced by transparency, accountability, and a neighborhood that would never forget the lessons learned. In the end, Willow Creek Estates was no longer a place of oppression, but a testament to courage, integrity, and the power of standing up to those who abuse authority.